now. Anyway, flying into instrument meteorological conditions, and that is after you've received a briefing, a weather report along your route or about any other thing. Instrument weather briefings rather, can change. Forecasts are just that, they are guesses. They do not always pan out to be exactly what you expect them to be, so use PIREPs, pilot reports, whenever possible. That brings me to another situation, no incident, okay, where I got a chance to fly to Alaska with a couple of women that were, probably, one of them was, the woman who owned the airplane was in her 75. She was 75 years old. This is a Cessna 210, and her friend. I was a flight instructor doing a wings program to get my flight instructor rating renewed. And she told me she was headed to Alaska to, I think she was making a wedding dress. Can you come along with us and be our safeguard? Sure thing, I'm going. I always wanted to go to Alaska, and I got the chance to go in this Cessna 210. This is a bigger airplane than this 172. I ended up crashing a Cessna 210 later. I'll get to that, and I'll explain to you why. This trip to Alaska with Romaine, I think was the owner's name. Well, she put me to shame. We took off from Boulder. This airplane that she was flying, like I said, is a Cessna 210, a heavier airplane. And I could barely move that airplane, push that airplane back or pull it. I can do it, and I can move bigger airplanes now that I've gained some, what is the word, finesse? Anyway, she moved that airplane by her, 75 years old woman. Moved that airplane like it's a toy by herself. That was her business. She'd fly around making wedding dresses for everybody around the country. Anyway, all three of us are up flying toward Wyoming. We park overnight at a place in Canada, on the north side of Canada, I think, called Whitehorse. And, well, I think we did an overnight prior to Whitehorse, but at this overnight, we're out in the field around the airport, camping, right? Tent. Required to carry a gun, a long gun, into Canada because of the wild animals. The law says you must have a gun flying through Canada. And we wake up in the morning to a moose yelling out from the forest that surrounds this wide open field. Beautiful trip, loved the trip. Anyway, we were flying up north again after that camp out, and landed prior to the last leg flying into Alaska. And we are receiving a weather briefing now at the airport that we're landed at, and I think it's Whitehorse. Anyway, we understand that the clouds are very, very low, and there is a low valley that we could fly parallel along. Mountain ranges would be high on both our wings, but the cloud bases were so low that flying IFR between mountain peaks in heavy clouds that are cold and icing, there's a lot of snow around, is really not a good idea for anybody to do. Even though this plane is not a low-powered plane, it has a lot more power than a 150 or 172, we decide to search for pilot reports, PIREPs, that are also in these weather briefings. Some of them are usually written, but you can talk to a weather briefer and he will make sure that you have a better picture. Anyway, the last pilot that had flown the same route through that valley and under those clouds said that we have about a 500-foot hard ceiling, meaning that we could fly below that ceiling and along the route, and we did because of the PIREP. We were considering waiting until the weather cleared. It might take a few days for that to happen. PIREPs are good things to get. Good idea to use them as often as possible. The forecaster on the ground, or the weather report, or the satellite picture, or the weather depiction report, or the terminal forecast, or any other type of weather reporting medium, if it is not done by eyeballs, and recently, is only a guess at best. Anyway, the next thing I'd like to speak about is something that is a good idea not to ignore, and this is on the maintenance side of the airplane, on maintenance. As a pilot, it's very often that because there are so many systems and circuits, switches and electrical options and things installed in an airplane, it's likely that you'll run up against something that is just not working. You turn a light on, it doesn't work, or you turn this radio on and it's intermittent, or you cannot do this or cannot do that. But because it's such a minor inconvenience at the time, it doesn't mean that it will remain a minor inconvenience. Meaning that if you neglect writing something down, if you notice something in the airplane is not working or it's acting weird, even though your hands are full with flying the airplane or navigating or changing frequencies or talking to controllers, even though you're busy doing all of those things, doesn't mean that you should neglect writing those things down. Maybe you should put a pad in a convenient location that is a stable, locked on, mounted location, maybe on your control yoke with an ink pen clipped to it, or on your knee, a knee board, a knee pad that they sell. Write down that item before you forget it doesn't work, or before you forget to mention it to the mechanic and have it fixed. One of these days you could end up in the weather or end up going somewhere else, and that radio that was intermittent goes completely out. It might be your only option to use in that particular location. Radios do go out. Everything does fail. You don't want to be trapped with a surprise. End up in the dark, cannot talk to controllers, don't see the ground to navigate or land to another location. Oh, by the way, I did want to mention that the training that I went through, private pilot training in Andalusia op area, I do remember doing the VFR pilotage, visual flight rules, in good weather and during the daylight. I do remember those things. So evidently I did have some cross-country training, and I probably had every little bit of training that was required. But as a new student, your main concern is trying to understand what your instructor is telling you and complying with the instructor's orders. So there was not a skimping of training other than the VOR, very high frequency omnidirectional radio, range radio. I would say that was skimped. And the reason I say this, and by the way, again, just above 1,600 hours, not 1,500 hours. And 1,500 hours nowadays is enough to get the airline or the air transport pilot certificate, check ride done. So I could be an airline transport pilot, I suppose, at least have the certificate. And I do not consider myself so out of practice that I am not sharp. I did learn something from a flight instructor that pretty much taught me how to land any airplane. Anyway, I'll get to that later if I remember it. I don't like to stop so often, but I think maybe the stopping is a good idea to continue talking about things that occur to me, and I think that all of this is a good thing to cover. I'll talk about that flight instructor who taught me how to land just about any airplane. The airplane that we were in, his son was behind us, sitting in the back seat. He's the flight instructor that helped me get my commercial instrument rating. We were in Boston, and we planned a trip to fly out to Colorado, to Denver, and then to Colorado Springs, and then back to Denver, and then back to Boston on a Cessna 172. Anyway, during this training, we are making landings at Boston, at Hanscom Field at Bedford, Massachusetts. And he noticed that I was landing the airplane without keeping it in the air very long. I think it was probably the beginning of my commercial training up there. And he, after I let the plane touch, he yanked the plane back into the air. He pulled up on the elevator, pulled back on the yoke so hard that he hit the tail on the ground. And I don't think he intended to do that. But we jumped right back in the air when I thought the plane was not going fast enough to even stay off the ground. And it did teach me. He shocked his son, he shocked me. But it did instruct me, it did teach me that if you keep flying the plane long after you think it cannot fly, as long as you're in ground effect, flying next to the ground, it will continue to fly and touch down and make a very nice landing if you just don't let it land. I had used that technique later at flying in the Mitsubishi MU-2, which is a twin turboprop. And that plane, the Mitsubishi MU-2, has a real bad reputation of killing folks. It's a weird plane. It's a Japanese manufactured plane. Does not have ailerons. Has only roll spoilers and full span Fowler flaps. Anyway, I landed that plane with the pilot who typically flew that plane along this mail route. His purpose, or his company, was carrying canceled checks. And he told his boss that my landings were as good as any of his. And I greased it in. I really made a nice, wonderful landing with that airplane. And MU-2 is a hard plane to fly, according to a lot of people. Big investigations about that plane. So I did learn how to fly, thanks to that particular flight instructor showing me that particular thing. We had a lot of wind under us. So when you're making a landing, the best way to make that landing is don't land. I know that sounds weird, but it's the truth. I'm going down my list of things I wanted to talk about here. Oh yeah. There are things that do happen in the world that you just don't expect to happen. I had started a boy, oh boy. I'm fighting myself to continue talking about all of the little things that you can run into being around aircraft. Aviation, I started at in 1974, and this is 2016. That's quite a few years. And aviation I've wanted to remain in, even though I've had a few bumps. I've been accepted around the world, usually, by people who were already in aviation. And I wasn't used to being accepted when I'm outside of my own neighborhood, which is Chicago, south side of Chicago, Elgale Gardens. And everybody in aviation, 99.9% of them are white people. And I've only run into maybe one or two that made me feel obvious that they were prejudiced. That is something that you probably will encounter, but because they were so few and far between, it let me know that aviation is still my home. These people who are in aviation have been here because they want to gain knowledge of other cultures. They want to travel. They want to share life with people. they see all people as, I would think, their family. Aviation, in a way, has been even more accepting than, I would not say more accepting necessarily, because most of the time I'm in churches, I'm always accepted too, and they're white churches. But it has been very accepting to me. I'm bringing prejudice up because it occurred one time, and it really wrecked my life. The person who decided to screw me did a pretty good job, and it was specifically because of prejudice. Hopefully I'll get over that. I lost thousands. I've lost bunches and bunches of money because of somebody deciding that I did not fit the demographic. I was opening a mechanic shop, taking care of a flight school's airplanes. This flight school had over 30 airplanes that were a guaranteed income to me. And if I had been successful with that shop, I'd be a multi-millionaire right now today. The person who was doing that before, who I had worked for, is a multi-millionaire. He started out doing exactly that, but after I complied with all the rules of that particular location and the rules of the person that finally said no, and that particular reason that he said no was not in his list of rules that the airport published. I was told later that it's obvious to them that it was prejudice. And anyway, lost all kinds of money, lost all kinds of things. So if you decide to go into business, and I am not necessarily preaching that you do this, but I did not fight that when he said no. I probably should have. I probably should have taken it to the governor, to the lawyer, to possibly even to the President of the United States. It just did not occur to me. So if you do run into any obstacles like this, where you know that you are being wronged, consider fighting. Consider it. Going to the next item here. Oh yeah, boy. This is the second instance. I had been an instructor, a flight instructor. I had been a mechanic instructor, and I had taught turbine engines and taught airframe systems for large airliners and things like that. I even got a letter of recommendation, a commendation from one of my students who was a retired DC-8 captain. And I'm teaching him about airplanes. Anyway, he said I did an excellent job. I knew what I was doing, and I knew the airplanes. And I got hired at this one place. This is the second instance of prejudice. The only other incident. I got hired at this place as a new mechanic, turbine engine shop in the Denver area. And they required that new hires take a series of written tests on all the different jets that they operate. They had Falcon 50s, they had Cessna Citations, they had CJs, they had turboprops, King Airs, and MU2s would come through every now and then. They had the Hawkers and Falcon 10 and 20s, and a Falcon, I think, 2000. Anyway, I came in, took these written tests on all of these different types of airplanes, and the next thing I heard was that they didn't want to train Walter anymore. I think I aced all of those tests. And didn't really require much study on them because I had been studying these airplanes and the psychology or the engineering of aircraft for many years before I was hired there. And there was a requirement that I get checked out by a instructor there, or a lead mechanic or shop foreman, to taxi and run up these jets before I could take them out and do the troubleshooting myself. Although I saw a lot of other mechanics there who had not gone through this training period, and were running these airplanes without any kind of cards or certifications to do that. But I knew that because I am a fly in the milk, is what my father told me that I was out here, I'd better comply with all of their written regulations. I took the tests, heard that the leads were told not to train Walter anymore. One lead there decided, though, because he was going to retire and he wasn't afraid of being fired, who also understood what that order was about. They wanted to get rid of me, also because I was a Christian there. They wanted to get rid of me, but he decided that after he spent some time talking with me and walking around and telling me about him, getting close to me, and I figured that he'd probably be the most prejudiced person in the whole place. He was an old white dude. I liked the dude a lot. He decided to train me to do the checkouts, even though they told all the leads not to. And when he came in after I had sat in the airplane with him for probably 2 or 3 minutes and got checked out that quick because he understood that I knew what was going on, he told all the mechanics there that Walter's just checked out in this particular Beech 400 turbine, this jet. He didn't even bother to have me taxi the airplane around because he knew I knew what I was doing. And being a flight instructor, I knew about the airport environment, communications, how to taxi the plane, and showed him that I knew how to run it and troubleshoot it. I understood everything in it. And one of the leads, a young kid, looked like he was shocked out of his brain that Walter was already checked out to run these airplanes when he told everybody else not to train me. I suppose they thought I was going to take his job. Anyway, I ended up getting zeroed in on, and they knew how to get you out of there. Those are the only 2 instances in how many years is this? 2006 minus 1974, what is that, 30? Jeez, that's a bunch of years. 40 years? Over 40. So, prejudice does exist. I think that was probably about 8 to 10 years ago. However, it's not very common. So don't walk around thinking that you're going to get hung. Or don't walk around thinking that they don't like you because you're black. It does happen. But when it has happened, it has been a surprise to me. It was more surprising to see so many people welcome me. So don't think that aviation is not a good place for black people. It is. Again, I told you that I was going to cover things that have to do with piloting, and with maintenance. Things that come up that you don't have any experience with. And I'm speaking specifically about aircraft repair. And I'm not speaking only about this because there are a lot of things that when you are training in a new industry or a new career field, that's exactly what's going on, is that you're training. Even though I've been in this career field since 1974, and this is 2016, doesn't mean I'm not still learning. And you will be learning from the very get-go. There are lots and lots of innovations and modifications and new inventions and new applications of all kinds of different new things and new thoughts being put forward all the time. We have been using technology in aviation. This is a World War II airplane, a P-51 Mustang. We have been using technology from way back there, and that technology is still being used today. However, there is so much technology being proposed and put forward nowadays that it will just make that look ridiculously obsolete. So you will continue to learn, and you'll be running into situations of how to deal with that new knowledge that will baffle you. So take the time out to consider aspects of how that is to be used.